A casual hoodie, a luxury showroom, and one jaw-dropping reveal what happens when a car dealership manager misjudges the man who secretly owns it all. Darryl pulled into the parking lot of Prestige Motors, the flagship dealership he had recently acquired in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. The desert heat shimmered off the sleek luxury vehicles parked out front, their glossy finishes practically glowing in the afternoon sun. He parked his modest SUV in an unmarked spot at the back and stepped out, taking a moment to scan the dealership's facade. He wasn't dressed for attention, quite the opposite. A simple grey hoodie, slightly worn jeans and sneakers were his uniform. For the day, his decision to dress casually was deliberate. He wanted to see the dealership's true colors, to experience how it operated when no one knew the new boss was watching. As he walked towards the entrance, he noticed a small group of employees inside, chatting near the front desk. The faint hum of laughter and casual conversation carried through the glass doors. Darryl opened the door and stepped inside. The air-conditioned showroom was a stark contrast to the heat outside, filled with the faint scent of leather and fresh wax. Rows of pristine cars gleamed under the bright overhead lights. The chatter quieted as he walked in. Darryl caught the brief glances exchanged between the employees, their eyes flicking to his hoodie and sneakers. He felt the subtle shift in energy, the kind that spoke louder than words. But he wasn't here to make assumptions, he was here to observe. Then, from across the showroom, she appeared. Susan was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Her tailored blazer and polished heels spoke of authority, and the clipboard tucked under her arm added an air of efficiency. She approached with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her expression was polite at first glance, but there was a tightness in her smile that didn't escape Darryl's notice. "Excuse me," Susan began, her voice cool and clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Darryl smiled, his demeanor calm. "Just here to look around," he said casually, gesturing towards the cars. Susan's eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe. Her polite mask slipped ever so slightly, replaced by something less welcoming. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, her tone carrying an edge of doubt. Darryl nodded, still smiling, something like that. Susan's lips pursed. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I could recommend." Before she could finish, another employee called out, "Hey, Susan, the delivery guy is here." Her attention wavered for a moment, but her gaze snapped back to Darryl, as though ensuring he wouldn't wander too far. Darryl raised an eyebrow, but kept his tone light. "You're assuming I'm not qualified." The question seemed to catch her off guard, but only briefly. She recovered quickly, her posture stiffening. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she replied with a forced smile. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to." Darryl's expression didn't waver, but internally he noted her choice of words. His calm composure was unshaken, but the subtle sting of her assumptions was undeniable. The moment lingered, tension hanging in the air, as Susan stared at him expectantly. Darryl glanced around the showroom, pretending to admire one of the nearby cars. It was a sleek silver coupe with an aggressive design. His fingers brushed the door handle, and he glanced back at Susan. "Nice car," he said simply. Her brows furrowed slightly, but she forced another smile. "It is. Perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." Darryl stood there for a moment, considering her words before stepping back from the car. He nodded, once hands in his pockets, and gestured for her to continue. "All right, let's hear it. What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, surprised by the directness of his question, but before she could respond, Darryl added, "If you think you know what I need, I'm all ears." Her polite facade cracked just enough to reveal the impatience underneath. "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly. I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Darryl smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He'd seen enough, that's quite the assumption," he said softly. The statement hung in the air, and for a brief moment Susan faltered. Then, regaining her composure, she straightened her shoulders. "I'll be back with a list of options," she said, walking away briskly. Darryl watched her go, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the silver coupe, his reflection staring back at him in the glossy finish. This was going to be an interesting day. Darryl stood in the center of the showroom, hands in his pockets, his gaze drifting over the lineup of cars. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but Susan's dismissive attitude was hard to ignore around him. The staff had resumed their conversations, though he caught the occasional glance in his direction. It was the kind of scrutiny he'd become accustomed to over the years. The silent judgment, the coded. "Look," Susan returned a moment later, her clipboard clutched tightly as though it were a shield. Her brisk stride and forced smile betrayed her annoyance. "All right," she said, stopping a few feet away from him. "I've compiled a few options that might be more suitable for your situation." Darryl tilted his head slightly. "My situation?" "Yes," Susan replied, her tone clipped. She handed him a printout of pre-owned vehicles, each with detailed descriptions and price tags, well below the dealership's typical offerings. "These are more accessible models, reliable, economical, and well-practical." Darryl took the list without a word, his eyes scanning the page. A used sedan, an older SUV, a compact hybrid. His lips twitched in faint amusement, but he quickly hid it, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "Appreciate the effort," he said, his tone. Even Susan seemed momentarily disarmed by his response, but she quickly recovered, her hands resting on her hips. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping as if she were about to share a secret. "I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Darryl met her gaze, his expression calm but unwavering. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Susan hesitated, but only for a split second. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." Darryl repeated, his voice neutral, almost thoughtful. "Interesting." There was a flicker of uncertainty in Susan's eyes, but she pressed on. "I'm just being honest. It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." Darryl let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head, slightly honest. "Huh, I like honesty. How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan's eyebrows shot up for the first time. She seemed genuinely caught off guard. "The owner, that's right," Darryl said, his tone light, almost conversational. "I'd like to have a word with them." Susan's lips twitched in a poor attempt at a smile. "Well, that's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a busy person." "I'm sure they are," Darryl said, nodding slightly. "But maybe you could give them a call. Let them know I'm here. I think they'd want to meet me." Susan's smile tightened. She was beginning to lose patience, and it showed. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to. If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants. Otherwise, what?" Darryl asked, his tone still calm, though there was an unmistakable edge to his voice now. Susan's eyes narrowed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Darryl stood still, his gaze locked on hers for a moment. The entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, Darryl reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "All right," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "I'll make the call myself." Susan blinked, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing? Just calling the owner?" Darryl replied, lifting the phone to his ear. "Shouldn't take long." Susan's confidence faltered, her irritation giving way to confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out around them. A few employees had stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the unfolding scene. Darrell held up a finger as if to say just a moment, then turned slightly away, speaking into the phone. "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here?" He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning back to Susan. "They'll be here shortly," he said, simply. Susan stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Who did you just call?" Darrell didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the showroom, his gaze lingering on the staff who are now watching intently. "Guess we'll find out," he said, his tone almost playful. The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of it pressing down on everyone present. Susan shifted uncomfortably, her composure beginning to crack. Minutes passed, but the room felt frozen in time. Susan busied herself with her clipboard, though her movements were stiff and deliberate. Betraying her unease, Darrell, on the other hand, stood casually by one of the luxury SUVs, his calm demeanor only adding to the tension. The few employees scattered around the showroom whispered to one another, stealing glances at the unfolding scene. It was clear everyone was waiting for something or someone. The sound of the main doors opening broke the silence. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit stepped inside his polished shoes, clicking softly against the tile floor. His expression was serious but warm, and his eyes immediately found Darrell. "Mr. Carter," the man said with a wide smile, extending his hand as he approached. "So good to see you." Darrell returned the handshake with a firm grip, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thanks for coming. Alex appreciated." The room collectively stiffened. Susan's clipboard nearly slipped from her hands as her eyes darted between Darrell and Alex, the dealerships. The regional director's confusion quickly turned to visible alarm. "Wait, Mr. Carter," she echoed, her voice uncertain. Alex turned toward her, his friendly demeanor shifting into something more professional, almost curt. "Susan, I see you've already met Mr. Carter." Susan blinked, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize he's the new owner of this dealership," Alex finished for her, his tone sharp. He glanced at Darrell with an apologetic expression. "I trust this wasn't your ideal welcome." Darrell raised a hand, stopping him. "It's all right, Alex. I think Susan and I just got off on the wrong foot." His voice was calm, but the weight behind his words made the entire room fall silent. Susan's face turned pale, and she took a step back, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a shield. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Darrell asked, his tone still gentle but firm. "That I could own a place like this? That someone like me might actually belong here?" Her eyes widened. For a moment she looked utterly lost. "I didn't mean—" Darrell raised his hand again, cutting her off. "It's fine, Susan. Really." He stepped a little closer, his voice lowering just enough to draw everyone in. "But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would you have treated me any differently? Would you have shown me the same respect you'd give someone in a suit and tie?" Susan opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. Darrell gave a small nod, as though her silence said everything. Then he turned to Alex, his voice now carrying the full weight of authority. "Let's get everyone into the conference room. I think it's time we had a little talk about how things are run around here." The staff slowly filed into the sleek, modern conference room, the air heavy with tension. Though the space, with its glass walls and contemporary decor, was designed to impress, today it felt cold and suffocating. Susan sat near the back, her usual confidence replaced by nervous stillness. Darrell stood at the head of the table, calm, composed, and commanding the attention of everyone present. Alex stayed near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched the staff settle in. The low hum of whispered speculation faded as Darrell cleared his throat. His gaze swept the room. "Thank you all for joining me on such short notice," he began, his voice steady and firm. "For those who don't know, my name is Darrell Carter, and as of last month, I'm the new owner of Prestige Motors." A few employees gasped softly. Murmurs rippled across the room. Their reactions ranged from curiosity to quiet embarrassment. Susan sank lower in her seat, avoiding eye contact. "I came here today dressed casually for a reason," Darrell continued, his voice calm and steady. "I wanted to see how this dealership really operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to feel what a potential customer might experience walking through these doors." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "What I experienced today was disappointing," he said. "I wasn't judged by what I could bring to the table, but by how I looked. And I'm not here to single anyone out. But we need to have an honest conversation about what that says about the culture we've created in this dealership." Susan shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face flushed. Darrell's eyes briefly landed on her before returning to the group. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "It's about every person who walks through those doors, every customer who may not match someone's assumptions of what a luxury car buyer looks like." One of the younger sales associates hesitantly raised his hand. Darrell nodded in his direction. "Go ahead." "Mr. Carter," the man began nervously, "I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes, well, it's hard not to make assumptions." Darrell nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said. "We all carry biases, whether we recognize them or not. But here's the truth. It's not enough to just try to be fair. We have to actively challenge those biases. We need to build a culture where everyone who walks in, regardless of their appearance, background, or anything else, feels seen, respected, and valued." He paused again, letting the message sink in. "This dealership has a reputation for excellence, but excellence isn't just about the cars we sell. It's about the experience we offer. And moving forward, that experience will be built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness." A quiet ripple of agreement moved through the room, though a few faces remained uncertain. Darrell's gaze rested on Susan, who sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. "Susan," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "I want to give you the chance to speak. Is there anything you'd like to say?" All eyes turned toward her. She hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake," she admitted, her cheeks flushed with shame. "I misjudged you, and for that, I'm truly sorry." Darrell gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "I hope this experience serves as a reminder for all of us. Change starts with accountability." He turned back to the rest of the staff. "From here on out, we'll be implementing new training programs to ensure this dealership reflects the values I stand for," Darrell said firmly. "Every customer deserves to be treated with dignity. No exceptions. If anyone has a problem with that, now's the time to speak up." The room remained silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, but the weight of Darrell's words pressed heavily on everyone in the room. He let the quiet stretch just long enough to make his point, then continued, his tone calm but resolute. "Good," he said. "I'm glad we're all on the same page. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary. And this dealership is going to lead by example." He took a small step away from the table, resting his hands on the edge as he leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear. I didn't come here today to humiliate anyone. I came to understand the culture I've inherited and how we can make it better." His eyes settled briefly on Susan, still seated near the back. "Susan," he said, his voice softening, "you're an experienced manager. and I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are. But today was a wake-up call. For you, and for all of us. Susan looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. I understand, she said, her voice shaky but sincere. I was wrong, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Darryl nodded. I believe in second chances, he said simply. But accountability comes first. I'll meet with you one-on-one to discuss next steps. For now, let's focus on moving forward. He straightened, turning back to the rest of the team. We're not just selling cars here. We're building trust, creating relationships, and setting a standard of excellence. If you're on board with that, then I'm here to support you, every step of the way. This time, there was a clearer murmur of agreement, louder and more sincere. The tension that had filled the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of renewed commitment. Even Alex, who had been quietly observing from the door, gave a small nod of approval. Darryl smiled, just slightly, the kind of smile that hinted at both relief and resolve. All right then, let's get back to work, and remember, how we treat people matters more than anything we sell. As the staff began filing out of the room, Darryl noticed Susan lingering near the door. She approached him hesitantly, nervously twisting her hands. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice low. I just want to thank you for giving me the chance to do better. I won't let you down. Darryl looked at her for a long moment before answering, his voice steady. I hope you mean that, Susan. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they're willing to try. She nodded, eyes earnest. I am. Darryl watched her leave, then turned to Alex. Let's schedule a meeting with the team for next week, he said. I want to make sure everyone knows what's expected going forward. Alex grinned, the respect in his eyes unmistakable. You got it, boss. As Darryl stepped back into the showroom, he took in the sight of the cars gleaming under the afternoon sun. There was still a lot of work ahead, but for the first time that day, he felt hopeful. This wasn't just about running a dealership. It was about building something greater, a space where people were measured by their character, not their appearance. And Darryl was ready to lead the way,